Hello there, my beautiful and lovely gamers. My name is Jonal. Welcome to another episode of Meta Talk, the series where we talk about meta strategies and tactics here in Overwatch. Today we are talking about goats, how to counter it, and more importantly, what is gonna happen to goats now that there's a huge buff and huge nerfs on the PTR that's changing a lot of the stuff. Well, that's what we are gonna talk about today. So, essentially, there has been a lot of stuff going on. I'm gonna talk about the most important ones after we have kind of broken down what is goats, how to be counter goats, right? So goats is triple, right? So 3 thanks for your support. And what does that actually mean? Well, normally the whole idea is that you run one of this, that you always run a break. Not always, but a lot of time you run a break. You run a Lucio, right? You have a Zarya, a D.Va, and then either a Ryan or a Winston. In our example, we'll use a Ryan, right? And then you have a Zenyatta or an Ana or whatever support you feel like having. Some people run Moira and so on. Right, in the end, Ghost is 3-3, so you can run all kinds of stuff, but the most commonly known one is the Ryan, Zarya, D.Va, Brigitte, Lucio, Zenyatta, for example. Now, what is the big problem with Ghosts? Well, the problem with Ghosts is that their front line, their entire main group, is so strong that you can't face them. And that's where the countering becomes. If you run 2-2, let's say you run Ryan, Zarya, Kree, Hanzo, on Zenyatta, or on a Lucio, or Zenyatta, Lucio, whatever you want to run of supports. The big problem is that a Ghost comp will effectively dominate your frontline every single fight. They will effectively just kill and destroy your Ryan, push him back. Ryan cannot claim space because he loses the frontline fight every single time. And that's the problem. The problem is that you cannot contest them in close quarters, so they can, for example, just rush an objective. If you run dive and say, I'm just going to jump around you, they can just play at the objective constantly. And you can't win because your Winston and your D.Va can't counter the front line and the main group of the Ghost comp. Now that's been the problem with Ghosts for a long time. So how the fuck do we counter them? Well, there's kind of 3 ways to counter Ghosts, right? Now the first one, and imagine Ghosts like this. Imagine that Ghosts is like a train, right? It's a choo-choo train. So the problem is if you run, let's say that you run again 2-2-2, right? With Hanzo, Kree, whatever, right? Zarya, Ryan, whatever, right? 2 supports, 2 DPS, 2 tanks, right? They are playing a train, and you are essentially riding around on a fucking bicycle. And well, what happens when the big train kind of immediately starts ramming into the guys on the bicycle? Well, you get fucking smushed, right? And that's the problem. So one, the way to deal with the train is to just fucking send your train against the train, right? It's Ghosts, which is kind of Goats versus Goats, which is what we see a lot now. And then it's all about who plays Goats best. That's why London Spitfire is struggling a lot in the meta, because they're not very good at Goats. They have a very bad Goats comp, doing that other teams is winning because they're playing Goats versus Goats, and essentially they're sending 2 trains against each other, and the London Spitfire train is just of lesser quality, therefore the other train normally wins that impact. Now, the second way of dealing with Goats, which you've probably seen, is to say, okay, so we can't beat you. This is normally done on offense, right? So what we're gonna do is that we are gonna slowly but surely dismantle your train. However, this is done in 2 ways. One is kind of known as the offensive way, one is the defensive way. The offensive way is what's known as quad DPS, right? Now, this is normally done with Hammond. Before Hammond was introduced, people did the same thing with D.Va, right? But Hammond is so good to do it with. So what you'll do, for example, Volskaya, you'll play Volskaya and you'll attack Volskaya, and you will put your DPSs such as Sombra, Tracer, Widowmaker, Pharah, right? You have spam, high damage, hack, CC, right? You have all this kind of stuff with the DPS. You have a Mercy to heal. Remember that Goats has very little range, so it's not like our DPS is constantly gonna get poked at. So they have very little range. And then you run a Hammond. The Hammond is constantly gonna go on the point touching it. The defending team need to contest. If they do so, they're leaving openings for a Widow. They're leaving openings for the Sombra to hack. The Tracer's dealing a lot of damage, also looking for picks, right? You have a Pharah constantly spamming, constantly keeping the enemy team, the Goats come, low on shields, low on healing, low on stability, right? And therefore slowly but surely pressuring, just damaging. The Hammond touches the point to try to contest. The Hammond can walk away. It's very difficult to punish and kill the Hammond. Normally that was the problem with the D.Va. You could force the D.Va to use her booster, and then you would know the boosters of cooldown. If she touches now, we amp speed after her. And if she doesn't touch them, we now have time to just hide, because she cannot touch while her boosters of cooldown. Hammond is very different. Hammond can just roll away. He has his adaptive shield and so on, right? So that's the problem with there. And then you have, of course, have the Hammond to also CC the tanks. If they want to try to do a move, you can CC, knock around, stun, and essentially slow down the rotation or the push of the Goats comp. So that's the other one, is to run this kind of, 4 DPS team composition, 1 tank and 1 support, right? 4-1-1 against the Goats comp, right? And play around it. Very nice on offense, works on some maps, doesn't work on some others, right? Now, then, in the end, we have stuff like the third one, which is the treehouse composition or bunker composition, which is the Orisa comps. We saw this against what G Pantheon played in one of their matches. I forgot against who. Someone in the comment section can probably remind me. But when G Pantheon played, what they essentially were doing is that you have an Orisa, you normally have a Diva or a Hog, but normally it's a Diva for high ground and low ground control, right? So you have an Orisa, a Diva, you have 2 supports, like for example Ana Sen, right? So you have Anti-Nade, Sleep Dart, a lot of healing, Nano Boost, and you also have Sen for Discord Orb, damage, and Trance. And then you run, for example, Pharah Ashe, right? Pharah doing the same thing that she would do normally, just raining down rockets into the Goats, constantly keeping them weak, constantly weakening them for day one. The Orisa and the Diva and the Ashe. Ashe can throw dynamite, and Ashe can also look for picks on the supports together with the Pharah. The Pharah is normally getting pocketed by Mercy, so not actually Ana Mercy. Normally it's like Sen Mercy composition instead of Ana Sen. So Sen Mercy, right? The Mercy is damage boosting the Pharah and constantly dealing damage. You have an Ashe that is looking for picks, also dealing a lot of damage. Have their big dynamite. The Ashe is also difficult to rush, and you kind of put these guys on high ground so that the enemy team need to do like a super long run marathon to get up to the high ground to finally fight, right? So by the time that they get up there, they're already weak. Your DPS have time to look for picks and get frags and so on. So that's the 3 ways to kind of counter Goats. Either Goats versus Goats, quad DPSing it, or bunker comp it, right? Now, normally we have seen very little bunker composition in the tier 1 scene, and that is what I believe is happening now with the new patch notes. So let's really just talk about that. So what are we looking at in the new patch code that's important? And there's some stuff that is really like quality of life for the solo queue experience and so on that we could talk about, but I'm going to try to focus mostly on the most important things that came through in the patch notes. Now, first of all, there's a knockback distance that has been more consistent. That's just again quality of life to a certain extent, but also here that our flying can now be knocked back and slowed, which is nice. It's good against Divas, good against Mercies, good against Hammonds, right? Stuff that are moving and flying like that can now get actually knocked back and slowed consistently, right? Which is just nice. It does mess up some stuff, like for example Divas that like to fly in and push people that they can now to a certain extent get stopped much easier and so on. So that's a little bit of that. But then the big one is, so when we look at Goats comp again, right, how are they able to keep up, right? You would think that a tank composition is lacking damage, right? And that should be like, oh, we can out damage you, right? For example, we'll put in a Hanzo instead of, one of our heroes. But that's not the case, right? Because you have Ryan, which is very heavy damage in the front line, but you can to a certain extent stop him by damaging him, and there's a level of risk that he can deal damage with. But the whole core of the damage output of the Ghost is of course a Zarya. So what they've done is they have said that beam type damage is now reduced by 20% when hitting armor. Ghost is a very heavy armor team composition with the break and so on, so they're reducing the damage of the Zarya. The Zarya is the main damage source and the heavy DPS, right? You'll see normally, Prophet, you'll see AKM, you'll see a lot of the DPS player play the Zarya, and the Zarya is insane and very heavy on the damage side, of course, together with Diva and Ryan and so on. But the Zarya is like the big, very heavy one for the damage. So reducing her effectiveness against these tank composition is one way to try to shift away Goats, right? If you want to run Goats against Goats, it's fine to a certain extent, but what if they give you another alternative? And when we look at this, so again, what do we want to look at? If we look at the tank patch notes, right? There were 2 things that happened to tanks. First of all, Orisa, which is the main component in a bunker comp, has now increased movement speed penalty while firing is reduced from 50 to 30, giving her faster movement speed, more kite ability, more able to deal damage while still doing a rotation to create space. And Hammond, adaptive shield no longer requires him to cancel his roll mode, meaning he can be moving fast and effectively. You can, if you have Goats stacked up with 6 players, you can slam into those guys as a Hammond and pop shield while you're running out again, increasing your health effectively up to a level 100, right? So you have 2 buffs for one for Orisa, one for Hammond, then you have a nerf to the Zarya against these armor team composition, right? Which is my way of saying that okay, this is something that I actually look for. If we look at Baptiste as well, Baptiste doesn't work very well in goats potentially, right? As if you are brought down, as I've talked about, to I think it's 20% of your health inside of goats, they just remove your immortality field immediately. It's very good against flankers, and I think that it's a handicap to dive, right? It's a very easy way to peel a Sen or something like that. But in another way, it doesn't work that well against goats. However, where it does work great against is if you run, for example, goats, or you try to run dive, and we run this bunker comp. Bunker comp normally was the countered by dive and was a counter to dive, but dive could also very easily deal with bunker comps. So by having Baptiste, you can actually put that extra sustain onto this heavy damage, right? Normally, it's a very heavy damage dealing composition, like an Ashe and a Pharaoh, or a Junkrat and a Hanzo, or a Junkrat and a Widow, right? Normally you saw these very heavy DPS comps come out with the bunker as it's a poke comp. The meaning of it is to deal insane amount of damage to your team to make sure that you are already weak before you even make it to my tank, my Orisa, right? So being my Orisa able to move, and then we have immortality field to sustain, so when they close the gap, we can sustain for a longer period of time. But he's also very good at healing, has a pretty good healing ability, and when he got his ultimate, you can amplify a lot of damage, a lot of healing as well, but especially a lot of damage to this Pokemon, almost guaranteeing a one engage with immortality field and his damage boosting cube. I forgot what it's called again. Someone in the comment section is probably gonna hate on me for forgetting the name, but it's a new hero, okay? I'll remember it soon enough, right? So there we saw those kind of stuff. If we look at some other stuff, right, we see a nerf to Lucio. His speed song has been lowered from 30% to 20% by passive, and his amp up speed has been reduced from 70% to 50%. So meaning that these ghost comps again move slower now, even during their rush period, which is their amp up, right? We see Xenorb having his this is more again a personal like small thing. His general effect is reduced from 30% to 25% damage, and his damage is increased from 46 to 48, meaning it's a little bit more of an individual frag here. That's essentially what they're trying to do, make his Orb of Destruction count more than just a Discord orb, right? So it's not just a Discord turret. We also have a little bit of a nano boost healing nerf for there from 250 from 300 down to 250. It's a small thing, but still something that's nice to note. When we kind of move more again over to the DPS side, what we do see is stuff like Sombra, which is a big counter in goats, and if we remember right when we talked about quad DPS, stuff like Sombra is very useful as you get hack wine, and you can also run Sombra in this something that I tested with scrims while I was scrimming on the PTR now with a couple of teams. Thank you guys again for letting me come. I was supposed to say that in the beginning of the video, but thank you guys for having me there. I consulted them a little bit, and essentially I consulted them, and I also got some experience more or kind of being allowed to come back into scrims whenever I have time and so on, which is really nice. Sombra can be used also in these bunker compositions if needed, or in these heavy DPS compositions by hacking and so on, right? And now it's so that when you're hacking a health pack, you are instead of putting your ability on a full cooldown, it's putting it on half cooldown. Doing that, it's more meta or more acceptable for the Sombra to hack health packs. At beforehand, it was the only reason that we did it before was because you got ult charge. As soon as they removed it, that you don't get ult charge from healing from health packs anymore, then a lot of people stopped using it for that. So that's also a small quality of thing that again is a buff towards Sombra. Deadeye has now a longer charge time, so if you catches a team that's rushing, for example, King's Row first spawn, which is a point where a lot of teams used to play bunker comps, right? They rush onto the objective. You can set up a Deadeye with a shield, and well, as long as they're standing on the objective, playing in that cover, without that cover, then you can line up and charge so much damage into them that you can quickly destroy them before they move out. Widowmaker has a buff. She can now see health packs when ulting, which is like really insane for some of the higher tier Widowmakers, that they know who they can one-shot very easily compared to others, and makes it easier for them to do very good target prioritization call. Doomfist has a buff, which we did see Doomfist played, especially in contenders, again with G Pantheon, playing Doomfist against Ghost Comp with their dive, where his cooldowns are reduced on his uppercut and his Seismic Slam, sorry about that. Hanzo has a buff. Hanzo is a very good tank buster, as we know, can work very nice in poke comms with his larger Sonic area. It's a small thing, but it's a thing nonetheless. And you kind of see where this is going, right? There's some buffs to some tanks specifically. There's some nerfs to certain supports. There are some changes with a new hero and some in general in-game changes that's happening, which does lead me to say that what Blizzard is trying is to introduce that GOATs is still going to be played, or else they would just brainly just remove a lot of the core mentalities of GOATs, right? Which is very difficult to do. But what I think they're doing is they're trying to introduce more stuff like bunker or T-Ray house compositions. You can also play quad DPS more effectively now. You can now have different options towards Ghost comps, which does that Ghost comp will in general, especially meta-wise, be played way less. A lot of the stuff that's been doing, for example, also increasement on Junkrat's impact from 40 to 60 when he hits a grenade, right? Also a lot of this helps solo queue a lot more in ranked, as also in a general meta. So that's what I believe is going to be happening, is we'll see more quad DPS potentially, but also specifically we'll probably see a bit more of this treehouse composition, at least on defense. I would at least expect to see a bunch of teams try those out during the Overwatch League. But besides that, guys, I would love to hear your opinions down to comment, and like and subscribe and click that bell notification as always. As always, guys, if you're interested in hiring me as a private coach for yourself or for your team, it's 50 euros for a 2-hour session. If you're interested if you're a high tier team, you're interested in me in coming in and consulting for free, that's something that we can do. Hit me up on Discord, whichever those is. My Discord is linked down in the description, together with my Twitter, my Twitch, and all that stuff. I hope that you guys have a lovely gaming experience. Please take care of yourselves, stay positive. I love you guys very, very much. And as always, it's been Joel, and keep the enemy in your crosshair.